is about your opinions on independence. You said about being home rule and federalism. If you could just elaborate on that.
Well, I believe that the four nations of the United Kingdom are best together. And that's why I think that a fresh constitutional settlement is necessary for the United Kingdom, which gives devolved powers to all four of the nations. At the moment, we have devolved powers in Wales, in Northern Ireland, and in Scotland. I believe the best relationship for Scotland with the rest of the United Kingdom is a federal one, because it is, putting it rather figuratively, the best of all possible worlds, in which you have responsibility for your own domestic affairs, you have the responsibility for raising, say, 60% of the money that you spend, but you nonetheless have the benefit and the advantage of being part of the United Kingdom, which has an established and significant role in the rest of the world.
Given the potential hostilities of that amongst the other parties in Westminster, how likely do you think this sort of federalism might be, say, in the next 10 years? Will it do that?
I think there's progress on this. First of all, for example, the Northern Ireland Assembly is bedded in, still occasional difficulties with terrorism, but the Assembly has bedded in. It's arguing for more powers for itself. In Wales, we've had the Silk Commission, which has concluded that the Welsh Assembly should have more powers. At the moment, England has been pretty quiet, but my view is that the emergence of UKIP suggests that there is a national sense in England which needs to be met. And the policies of UKIP are wholly abhorrent, but I think that national sense could be met by an acceptance that in England they are entitled to have a devolved system of administration.
And you said about the UKIP. Well, one of the issues in it is immigration, and the Scottish policy, if they want to get independence, they'll open us up a bit more, particularly to the 30,000 or so international students that are coming across. So what is your policy on that side of things?
Well, I'm very liberal, and you would not be surprised to hear me say on the whole question of immigration. I think we should have a liberal scheme, but we should make sure we enforce it properly. Part of the difficulties that have arisen over the perception of immigration is the absence of proper enforcement. For example, we don't always know who's come into the country, but we certainly never know who's gone out. And that seems to me to be a major flaw. There is a difficulty, of course, in terms of security. If you have two countries which are effectively joined together, Scotland and England, and one of them's operating a very relaxed immigration policy, whereas the other one isn't, because the obvious thing to do for those who have, if you like, malign intention towards London or the rest of the United Kingdom is to come into the country which it's easier to get into, and then simply to cross the border. That's why when people talk about passports, it may seem a pretty extreme suggestion, but it's not impossible that if there were serious penetration by terrorists, that the remainder of the United Kingdom would find itself forced to take steps to enforce a border.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the main issues for students at the moment is to do with tuition fees and the policy of charging England, Wales and Northern Ireland for their education and giving everyone else in the EU independent free. What's your feelings on the potentiality that the SNP, if the yes vote is granted, want to continue charging England, Wales and Northern Ireland and everyone else in the EU?
Well, I think that undoubtedly raises questions of discrimination, at least in the minds of the people or the families who would be subject to that. The European Union rules are very clear, but I don't see, for the moment at least, anything in the SNP's manifesto or proposals which suggests that they're willing to depart from that. I think that's a grave mistake.
Is it realistic then that they can get away, continue going against what the EU might prefer?
Well, it's a question of interpretation of the law, and the obligation, of course, is if you are a member of the European Union that you do not treat other countries, which are the citizens of other countries, in a way which discriminates against them in favour of your own citizens. I think the issue would be bound to be challenged, that law, in the European Court of Justice. I wouldn't like to predict the outcome, but I think the mere fact that this is a policy is deeply damaging to the reputation of Scotland. So far at St Andrews, It doesn't appear to have had impact on the number of people who want to come here. We still have, 11 or 12 applications for every first-year undergraduate place. This is a popular university because it's a very good university. So we, I think, have been largely immune from the consequences of the policy of the SNP government. But that's not to say we could always ensure that we enjoyed that immunity in the future.
Looking at a situation in which a yes vote is given in September, where do you see the Liberal Democrats in an independent Scotland, and particularly with your own seat, with your standing down next year and people suggesting that it might be lost to the Liberal Democrats?
Well, if there's a yes vote, then the next election, 2015, becomes rather difficult to predict. Because there will be those who were in favour of no, who will be extremely exercised by the fact a yes vote has taken place. And they will undoubtedly, in my view, want to support parties which they think would still be in a position of trying to reverse that decision. Now, I think that's unlikely that the decision can be reversed. Indeed, my whole approach to this is to say to people, rather glibly, remember, independence isn't just for Christmas. If this decision is taken, then it will have a very substantial effect for the foreseeable future in this country. Long after my life has come to an end, and indeed probably long after yours.
So you've said in quite a few interviews, well, I heard in an interview with Good Morning Scotland not so long ago, you said about this, independence is not just for Christmas. Do you feel, even though the information is there, that the voters do know enough about what they're voting for?
Well, this is the constant refrain from voters and from businessmen and from institutions. But the fact of the matter is we've had this debate in Scotland since 1979, and the reason why we've had it since 1979 is that was the date of the first referendum to give Scotland an assembly. And that debate carried on through the 1980s when Mrs Thatcher set herself against any devolved power to Scotland. It was carried through in the early 1990s under the leadership of John Smith and the Labour Party and David Steele and others, including myself. And of course in 1998 we had a Scotland Act. So there has been very considerable progress in devolving these things. But I'm in no doubt whatsoever that the importance of this change which is being proposed is fundamental and is not something which would easily be reversed, if indeed ever.
But then do people know the outcomes of what if they vote yes? Do they know what's actually going to happen?
Well, they don't, because the SNP has said it can do everything in 18 months. Well, I just don't believe that. We're talking about negotiating into NATO, which they will find very difficult because of their anti-nuclear policy. Negotiating into the European Union because they want to share part of the rebate which the United Kingdom presently enjoys. They need to establish all of the issues around security, intelligence services, Army, Navy and Air Force. They need to deal with the question that they insist upon, the withdrawal of Trident. The idea you can do all of this in 18 months is fanciful in my view. And that's something, and so that would lead to a period of very substantial dislocation in the life and the organisation and the administration of the whole of the United Kingdom, but most particularly about Scotland.
So where would you see then in a hypothetical independent Scotland in two or 3 years?
I don't think it's possible to predict that. I think in 2 or 3 years you could still be trying to work out the basis of the nature of the departure, and with no resolution of the position which the SNP say they would want to adopt internationally.
So just talking about your seat here and your relationship with the students, over the past 27 years, how have you found connecting with the students? Have you been able to do that?
Yeah, not found it difficult at all, anything but.
Because there has been a recent article on the St Online criticising students of not being politically active. And how do you feel about that?
Well, you can't force people to be politically active. What you can do is to encourage them. It is true to say that on some occasions the university student population has been less interested in politics than on others. But that goes in waves. Sometimes you get generation, highly politically motivated. Other times it's less so. You can't force people to be interested, but you can certainly try to encourage them.
And they've lowered the age for voting this time, so clearly the young person's voice in this independence referendum is an important factor. How do you feel students should be encouraged to participate?
Well, if you're on the electoral register, you have a vote. If you're not on the electoral register, you don't have a vote. That's a rather arbitrary system, but it was a system which necessarily was easy to administer and brought certainty. Whereas if you were saying to people, well, you come from England, therefore you can't have a vote, or your grandmother came from England, therefore you can't have a vote. Or equally, you were saying, well, you left Scotland 3 years ago, you can have a vote, but you left Scotland 30 years ago and you can't have a vote. You can imagine the number of challenges on both sides of the argument. So it's entirely sensible, in my view, to have something which is fixed and capable of easy understanding and administration.
So, with your standing down next year, do you have any intention to, without being necessarily so politically active that you're involved, do you have any aspiration to continue having a voice?
Well, as I say to people, I'm leaving the House of Commons. I'm not leaving politics. And politics has been in my blood like printer's ink for a very long time. And I intend to remain as politically active as opportunities provide. But so far as the university is concerned, my principal activity, of course, was in a non-political area, which is as being Chancellor, an office which I value very highly, not least because it will give me a very visible and obvious continuing connection with North East Fife and with St Andrews University in particular.
You said you can't predict what an independent Scotland is going to be like, but how would you envision your ideal Scotland in 10 years' time to be?
Well, my ideal Scotland in 10 years' time would be one which has a federal or a near-federal relationship with the rest of the United Kingdom, that the powers available to the Northern Ireland and Welsh assemblies should have been expanded, and that England will have woken up to the fact that it needs to have more localism, that it needs to decentralise, that the continuing aggregation of power, influence and economic well-being to London is not in the interests of the North East or the North West or the West Midlands or the East Midlands. That's the kind of Britain I would envisage. Well, it's no secret that I believe that the best answer to the referendum question is no, and that should be followed by a greater devolution of powers and responsibilities to the Scottish Parliament, as well, in my view, to the other constituent assemblies of Wales and Northern Ireland. I very much hope every student who's on the electoral register will vote, but you will not be surprised to learn that I hope they will vote against independence, because I believe, and I believe this as a patriot, I believe independence would be against the interests of the people of Scotland and also the interests of the people of the United Kingdom.